was hoping today we could explore some of the things that we're often asked by high net worth families, family offices. I think there's often a question about, what should they be doing on the aviation side?
We typically work for the client and not for the transaction in a way that, okay, we're here to buy you an airplane. Well, not necessarily. We're here to understand your needs and we'll see if buying an airplane is the best for you.
So you go through this process with a client and they've made the decision to make a purchase. What are some of the other costs beyond just the obviously acquisition of an airplane that a client should be thinking about? And then if there's any notable trends within those input costs.
When we're looking at aviation finances, we're looking at the total life cycle cost of the airplane. It's not just what does it cost to get in there? It's, okay, well, a $4 million large jet might be very different than a $4 million light jet because that $4 million large jet could be 25 or 30 years old. So one of the hidden costs is maintenance. It's a very opaque industry. Gabe said it earlier, lots of regulations when you're flying and operating, but on the trading side of this, there's no regulations. So it can be a little bit like the Wild Wild West. We've just taken this transparent approach and we try to build that trust over a long period of time, and you have to earn it.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.
Welcome to On Pointe, a podcast from Element Point. Today, David and I had the pleasure of speaking with Matt and Gabe from Guardian Jet, a leading private aviation company focused on aircraft brokerage, consultancy, and data analysis. Our topics today covered the current state of the private aviation market, as well as numerous topics that are relevant to aircraft buyers. I hope you enjoy our conversation with Matt and Gabe.
Matt and Gabe, welcome to the On Pointe podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
Great. Well, Carlos and I have so many questions about what you do and the area in which you live day to day within private aviation. But before we even dive into all of that, I think it'd be great to just hear from you in your own words about Guardian Jet and how you spend your days and how Guardian Jet works with clients for their aviation needs.
Sure. So Guardian Jet's a full service consultant, brokerage, and acquisition company. We work for high net worth individuals, private companies, and we have about 40 of the Fortune 100 companies as clients in some fashion. Again, whether it's fleet planning on the consulting side, the brokerage, which is marketing or sales, and the acquisition side. And we're about 50 people now, so a small company in the grand scheme of the world, but we're huge in our space. We're one of the biggest brokers and consultants in the aviation space. And we've gotten that way by just our bench strength. We have close to 50 people now. That covers every part of an aviation relationship from cradle to grave, including researchers, inside sales, acquisition specialists, a consultant team. We have a general counsel in-house. We have 3 full-time technical representatives, as well as a team of sales folks around the world that bring the business in, and we execute the trade here at the central office in Guilford, Connecticut.
That's great. Well, I mean, you touched on a lot of the reasons why we think of you guys as, one of our first calls, if not our first call on the private aviation side. I was hoping today we could explore some of the things that, we're often asked, or questions we're often asked by clients, and you probably are too. And that is really for non-corporate clients, so high net worth families, family offices. I think there's often a question about, what should they be doing on the aviation side? And, we often field the question, especially if somebody like just sold their company and established a family office, they're wondering, what do I do here? Do I do a fractional ownership type scenario? Do I just charter? Do I buy an aircraft? And you probably get that question every day, much more so than we do. So help us understand how you think about that and how to.
That's exactly the environment we live in. And, our industry is it's not a regulated environment. It's not like banks for any like real estate that you need to have a certificate. You need to have operate by certain rules and things. Unfortunately, it's not. And there's it's very fragmented. There's a lot of brokers out there. Obviously, America is the place for the most number of corporate aircraft. So by far, so that also translates into the highest number of brokers, pilots, and anything, you name it, right? Maintenance facilities and everything associated with corporate aircraft. And with that, the quality of the service of a broker and actually the definition of what they do varies significantly. And the clients, especially clients coming from, charters or fractional or just, first-time buyers in general, they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. They will probably be introduced to somebody that will be nice and talk them into aviation one way or the other. And that's their experience. They may compare with somebody else and talk to a friend that had another broker. But that is most of the very fragmented players are small players, and the quality of the service the clients out there would vary significantly. We try to be guys that are most on a consulting side of things before we actually get to trade anything. So we say here that our consulting work allows us to get to trade for the clientele that we work for. And that starts answering your question. What should I buy? Should I buy in the first place? Should I charter? Should I buy a fraction? And it all depends on what do you expect from the experience you're going to have from the service, from the very basic transportation from point A to point B safely and reliable, right? You have to be there. You don't want to hear excuses why your flight was delayed or you got canceled or you have to do this or that. Obviously, there are factors that are beyond anybody's control, such as weather or air traffic control limitations that we've been facing these days, and especially as we were discussing this week in 2025, these are beyond anybody. It's a major driver, but most of the cases you can absolutely minimize the risks by making the right decision on how you're going to fly, how are you going to get your people, your family, or your employees to move around the country or the globe on your needs. And that's why we exist in the first place. It's a lengthy conversation and understanding on their needs, budget as well, and expectations to then come to, okay, based on what we know from you, this is what the market has, and we go from there, right? That's from a buy-in perspective, obviously.
So, Gabe, I can really attest to the consultative approach that you take. Obviously we have clients in common, or have had clients in common over time with Guardian Jet. And one thing I've appreciated is that you don't just jump right into trying to sell them a plane. You really take the time to understand, what is the mission and what are you trying to accomplish and how many hours are you flying? By the way, that term, like what is your flight mission, was a new one to me. But I think you really take the time to understand that. And that is really important, especially with first time aircraft purchases. I know where you're dealing with, and I know you have a large corporate client base where they have, flight support departments and all of that. I think that's a really different animal. I think, where we sit with a lot of families who are buying aircraft for, the first or second time, having that consultative approach is hugely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I could make a comment about that, it's very important. It's kind of educational, right? If I could even call it that way. The buyers, and I'm sure in your general position, you guys are everything you see from art to real estate to aviation to all other opportunities for the assets that your clients will be dealing with. It's very important that they understand the most they can before making a decision, right? And the approach of client is a client-facing approach. It's a client-oriented interaction with the possible transaction that may or may not happen, instead of being the transaction the reason why people are being compensated or being, there in the first place. And that's absolutely something that changes the dynamic. We typically work for the client and not for the transaction in a way that, okay, we're here to buy you an airplane. Well, not necessarily. We're here to understand your needs, and we'll see if buying an airplane is the best for you. Obviously, the client is the one that always makes the decision. All we do is to put them in front of the right options for them to pick what they think is the best.
Yeah. We take that long-term approach, just to build on what Gabe was saying. We take that long-term approach with customers all the time. As Gabe said, we're customer-focused, not transaction-focused. We had a guy the other day hired us, and he was just so thankful. He literally wanted to do a case study on us because of the consultative approach that we took. And it took us a number of months and working with different budgets and financial analyses and really showing them the whole market and the whole array of services that are available in that industry. We're showing them different models. We're showing them different trip profiles, different range rings, different cabin comparisons, different capabilities of all the jets. And then we're then taking those airplanes at different purchase prices and projecting them over a number of years of ownership and what we thought it might be worth at the end with the tax benefits. He was so thankful we didn't ask him for his order. And by the time, we built that level of trust, the order was sort of already there. Another example, we had a guy hire us the other day and I got pretty close with him. And so he asked us, "Hey, how come you chose us, when you were interviewing Brokerage?" He said, "Matt, it was easy. You wanted to help me throughout my decision-making process." And another consultant we talked to said, "Call him when he's ready to buy or sell." And at that point, I think we take that long-term approach because we want our clients to, first, we have to build that level of trust in people. Trust in this industry is everything. It's a very opaque industry. Gabe said it earlier. Lots of regulations when you're flying and operating, but on the trading side, there's no regulations. So it can be a little bit like the Wild Wild West, although not as much. So we've just taken this transparent approach and we try to build that trust over a long period of time, and you have to earn it, which is important because we want people to tell their friends about us. We want them to tell colleagues and other businesses. We want them to come back, whether they're going to buy a plane. If they're a first-time owner, they're thinking about buying an airplane, they got the itch. The itch is not going to go away. Maybe they're not buying that month or that year, but at some point in the near future, 1, 3, 5 to 7 years, they're going to buy. We want them to call it back. And if they buy and have a good experience, they're going to sell in 3, 5, or 7 to 10 years. Want them to call us to sell and then buy again. So a long-term approach can be difficult, but it's made us very successful over the years.
Yeah, you hit on a couple of things that are very similar core values to the way we think about our business, which is, number one, we build it on transparency, and number two, we're our client's advocate, and we really think about it that way. And I think you do as well, which is really important.
There's so many parallels between our respective businesses, right? We're like, trust is paramount.
Yeah.
It's client centric, it's education, it's transparency. And it's and thinking about the long-term relationship. And so, that's why we really value the work you guys do. And we've enjoyed our time working together. Quick question
thank you. And vice versa.
Thank you. So you go through this process with a client and they've made the decision to make a purchase. What are some of the other, the total ownership conversation? What are some of the other costs beyond just the obviously acquisition of an airplane that a client should be thinking about? And then if there's any notable trends within those input costs that we should all be aware of.
Yeah. The costs are not, identifying them, it's not rocket science. We work with them. The thing is that people sometimes they overlook or they just don't think about it. It's like with your credit card statement, right? You try to think where you've been spending money out of your own memory, and then you look at your statement, you see that you only capture less than half of what actually happened. It's a little bit like that too. So we try to just be very detailed and transparent about how this is going to be. And because, you think of fuel, pilots, insurance, that's easy to get a few quotes, and the industry is well developed in allowing people to have access to this information, not super difficult. But when you talk about, the tax implications, you talk about the value loss. This is a depreciating asset. It's not a piece of real estate, right? How much is this going to be 3, 5, 7 years from now? Would that be any difference if I go between Model A or Model B? Would that make any difference if I lease or I finance or I pay cash? Or maybe I pay cash for the sake of a better deal, a fast deal that's on the table now, and then I refinance in the future. How does these things will compare to each other? That's where the difference will be a lot more relevant. And that's obviously a professional helping the client is what we take a lot of pride in, being very transparent and detail oriented will make a difference. So, wow, I didn't know there would be this much difference between product A and product B, because I've been on both and they are very similar. Well, they're similar from a passenger perspective, but not from a financial market perspective when you look at, vintage, age, things like that, technology on product A versus product B. And we love it. We're very proud of this. It's not a typical broker service, to a point that I had several, situations where the client asked me, you guys buy the airplane, right? You're the broker. You do the because you're so much into the consultant part that are you just a consultant? When I make a decision, I need to find a broker. No, of course we're the broker. That's how we get paid. But the education part is really, really important, just so clients don't, do something that obviously they can't afford. But then they realize I made a bad decision. I lost quite, relevant money here.
And Carlos, to answer your question more specifically, so when we're looking at aviation finances, we're looking at the total life cycle cost of the airplane. It's not just what does it cost to get in there. It's, okay, well, a $4 million large jet might be very different than a $4 million light jet, because that $4 million large jet could be 25 or 30 years old. So one of the hidden costs is maintenance, right? So you really have to understand the maintenance. All of these deals and airplane ownership discussions are always come back to the maintenance and the technical side of things. That's a huge portion of your budget. So it's also, what are the taxes around it, as Gabe mentioned? It's what is it going to be worth on the back end of the ownership period? Well, what are we going to sell it for? Because when we're going into an acquisition, we're also thinking about your exit strategy. We want to try to understand, not necessarily it's going to be worth exactly this in 5 or 7 years, but it could be worth this or this based on these factors. This model is worth X compared to, in relation to another model. So the residual value and the maintenance is big. The other thing on airplanes that's huge is obsolescence. Planes are computers. Planes are the avionics, the things that control the audio, the video, the temperature. These things are computers. And as an airplane ages, they become very much more difficult to support in terms of finding parts. But also the cost continues to go up. And the most important thing outside of the cost is the downtime. No one wants to be down when they're looking for a part and they're missing trips when they have a perfectly good asset that's just sitting there. We're a little bit more careful, or if you took that acquisition and did just a little bit more homework, or really did your due diligence based on the different models, the age of the airplane, what's going to become obsolete in an airplane in your ownership period, not just this year, next year, but your whole ownership period. People just don't like surprises, right? So our job is to communicate clearly that you have 3 brakes are going to come due next year, and 3 screens are on their last legs here, and it's going to be hard to support those when they break. And so it's just a matter of communicating that, getting out in front of any obsolescence and maintenance issues. Those become some hidden deals in airplane ownership period that people don't always understand going into it.
Yeah, and I think in my experience working with clients who own or were purchasing planes and working with partners like you, I think there's a couple things that have just jumped out at me. I mean, the first is that from a maintenance perspective, there are intervals of time where planes have to go down for major large scale, maintenance or assessments. And those can be very costly. And so understanding how far away you are and time consuming, right? And so understanding how far you are away from one of those periods is incredibly important. And I think, sometimes people don't necessarily realize it or underestimate the cost and downtime. And then the other thing that jumped out at me, and you touched on this as well, is, planes are computers, right? And so, and not only that, but they're computers with so many components. And so just understanding everything from what the cost is of replacing those components, how easily they're sourced, and then the downtime associated with different issues. Like it's just such a complex, it really is, you think about it as, I'm buying a jet. Like it's such a complex purchase because you're really buying something that has, hundreds of thousands of individual components. And so the cost of not understanding the complexity of it and the maintenance complexity.
It's incredible. And then David, to me, this right now, this moment we're living in, post-COVID with the supply chain, the disruptions that it had. And no, it's not, at least for aviation, the environment we're in, it's not fully resolved. Yeah, it's probably the topic you want to be the smartest about when you make a decision between product A or product B, because to Matt's point, you do a lot, right? I mean, it's a big purchase. It's a big investment. It's a big infrastructure around an airplane, employees that are fully dedicated to making that one asset available to that one time that you need it, the trip that you have to take. And then it's not available. How fun is that? It costs millions of dollars. There's a lot of efforts to get it to the few occasions you need it. And when you need it, it's not available. That's very frustrating. And everyone's associated with that asset. Their job is to make sure it will be not only available, but it will be efficient. It will be on time. It would be beyond any expectation, right? And some things happen that they're very difficult to go around. For example, to the supply chain, to your point, very little breakdown in the supply chains of who's the supplier of my supplier. For example, you buy an airplane from a brand XYZ, and then a part breaks, and you call the brand that you bought it from and say, I need the part XYZ. And they say, oh, no, it's short. And that's not an acceptable answer. And you have to dig. And then they realize that they actually outsourced that to another company. And then you go call the company directly and you see that they're out of business. And these things started to be since COVID, much more day to day for aircraft operators. They have to know. They have to know the suppliers of their suppliers. They have to have a phone number. They have to know where to pick up if the delivery system is not in place. We're brokers. This is more for the operators, but absolutely we can identify the products, the brands, the models that are more, often to be in, or others that are not.
And Gabe brings up a good point to segue into we're brokers, consultants. We help you on the asset, the execution of the trade. But part of what we do is assembling the team, and we'll build a team. And listen, we've seen every type of scenario, and every time we think we've seen it all, the next day a new scenario comes up that we have to adapt to. And we love buying a year-old airplanes with 200 hours on them, but we also have to run a smooth deal buying a 30-year-old airplane with 10,000 hours on it. Same thing on the sales side, right? Not every first-time buyer comes to us with a banker, a management company, an attorney, a tax guy, a family office. Sometimes they come to just us through our website analytics or inquiry or incoming calls, and we have to be part of that assembling the team. And so I love both sides of it. I love a guy that comes to me and has everything ready, and then we just have to go and execute the trade. As Gabe said earlier, that's the type of guy we're meeting in the brokerage capacity. He doesn't need as much of our consultant. But I love the other end of it too, where we have to assemble the team. Because now you're getting to refer very trusted partners into these deals. And so as part of it, as Gabe said, you want to make this ownership experience great for people. You want to make it efficient. You want to make it smooth. You don't want unexpected downtime or missed trips. And again, we're not operators, Gabe and I, but we're going to introduce you to the trusted operators, big, small, Gulfstream experts, Falcon experts, right? So we'll be part of the crew that brings in, hey, do you need finance? And we'll make introductions to our partners that we know they're going to have a good experience.
From my seat as a wealth manager and advisor to these families, of course, the cost of an aircraft is an important consideration, but it's often not their primary concern. It's a concern, but the primary concern is actually, does this mean that I'm going to be operating an additional small business now? Because I'm going to have pilots and I'm going to have, other staff that's involved. And, how does that work? And now I have to, pay and insure people and bring in these additional vendors, and the FAA requires flight logs. Who's going to do those for me? So it's a lot of that actually is the big, I think, concern or hurdle for people. And
it should
bring that question up.
I understand. And then, yes, it's a natural, questions one would ask if they're leaving off a charter operator where they booked that trip for a certain amount of money and nothing or very little is their problem. Or, NetJets, FlexJet, many other smaller fractional companies out there doing a great job. And then, okay, I'm graduating from these services and I want to have my own airplane because, there's a point where any buyer or flyer would realize, I think I should have my own airplane, and they will feel it. And sometimes it comes a little late in the game. And when they do the math, I should have actually done that long ago. I'm flying way beyond the number of hours that these services that I'm using, they were designed for people that didn't want to carry these things because it wouldn't make sense to have such a capable piece of equipment waiting for you for one flight a month for the owner, right? If they can afford it, that's how they want it, no problem. But most of the people would start, getting to corporate aviation. Well, now there's a new recent way of flying private, which is buying the seat out of a corporate jet with regular flights from New York to Miami, from LA to San Francisco. You buy that one seat. Very few companies still operating, in a nationwide speaking, but there's that. And then you can charter the airplane for you and your family or your employees and whoever you're flying with. Great. Then that becomes a little complicated because you need to do the full transaction every time you're going to fly. And if you're flying too often, you may want to have a setup for multiple hours or multiple trips without having to negotiate it every time you go. So there's solutions to that too. Then there's fractional ownership, and then there's the full ownership. All these segments before full ownership, they're focusing and making the passenger feel the best possible, right? They're like hospitality. It's like a 5-star hotel trying to get the best out of that trip and experience to their clients. When they get you full ownership, you already come with your bar very high because they're very good. They're very good at delivering, chef quality catering. And most of the airplanes, even the ones that are fully outfitted with full galleys, they're not a professional kitchen, right? You have microwaves and convection ovens and things like that, but it's not going to taste like a Michelin star restaurant whatsoever. And they make it that way. It's amazing. Then you buy your own airplane and your service level may go very, south if you don't take care of things the way the companies we've been flying with used to. So obviously the industry has evolved to deliver that experience to you. That's through what's called in industry the management companies or the operators of those airplanes. Typically high net worth individuals would prefer to have one associated with their airplane just so they don't actually have to do these things and know what's the best vendor. You could probably know if you're based in Miami what's going on in Miami, but then you fly to Alaska, you don't know there, right? Or places that you go. The operator should, and they would. And yeah, it's our job also to interview the client to understand their preference and expectations to that regard and connect with a group of small selected operators for them to interview and decide, I think I like this company better than the other. Sometimes very often they like the small company versus the big one. That would be, why not go into the big one? There are more capable, systems, people and everything. Well, it's not the same feeling. They don't know my name. There are reasons why one could go one way or the other. And our job is to identify that and put them in front of the options that we believe they would like.
Gabe brought up COVID and supply chain. So obviously during the COVID period, we saw a huge increase in private aviation. On top of that, companies were dealing with supply chain challenges. So curious, as you fast forward to today, number one, what is the current state of the market? Is it more in balance, or would you call it a buyer's market? And as far as the manufacturers who have had to deal with these supply chain challenges, I would imagine some have dealt with them better than others. And so where are we in sort of the manufacturing of new airplanes? Is that kind of gotten back into balance, or do we still have a big backlog?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Matt, maybe I can talk about the OEMs. I used to work for one of the OEMs. It's no secret. I worked for Embraer almost 10 years, shy of 10 years in the sales division of corporate airplanes, and had the opportunity to see the behind the scenes of what are the challenges to deliver what the company is promoting out there. And there are many, many very complex problems to solve, supply chain being one of them. Obviously, it's probably one of the most regulation supply chain are probably the two most complex problems for the manufacturers to deal with. But COVID actually was a big push to this industry, as no secret to people that fly and have some interaction with corporate aviation. The manufacturers were able to build a backlog that is very healthy right now. For some products, the balance between one sale for one delivery or more than one sale for each delivery has been the norm since the late days of 2020, when the world realized that there's a light in the end of this tunnel and people started buying more corporate aviation. Corporate aircraft in COVID became a lot of our clients, they had multiple homes or many things that in the list of priorities were before a private airplane for their transportation. And COVID, because of the health and the exposure and everything that made people so concerned, obviously, just jumped all the way to, if I can't afford it, I want it. I need it more than I want it, right? And that turned the market to a very, very hot market, a market where buyers were fighting for good assets. And beyond that, Carlos, the market at some point in 2022, 2 years into this environment, it started to have some anomalies. Airplanes that were supposed to be retired in age, vintage, utilization, they were transacting in $5-7 million. Interest rates were low, and the economy was doing, still with a hangover of excess liquidity. That created an anomaly in the corporate aviation inventory and market. Now we're past that. Rates are not that cheap. The people are a little more back, down to earth with their businesses, and every segment normalized a little bit, and ours as well. But still, it's better than it was before. And the manufacturers were able to keep their production rate at a very sustainable level. And the balance between buyers and sellers it's a good one. It's fine. It's balanced.
Similar to that take, I will say right now, you look at, we're talking, it's November 2025. We're in the middle of Q4, which is typically 35 to 40% of our business in a given year. And that's because people have had their whole year to understand where their financial picture and their tax structure is going to come in on. So capital asset, 100% bonus depreciation came back. We are in a very, very position of strength. We're in a very strong position in our industry right now. And I see that going forward. All the reports you read, all the experiences we're having, it's just a resilient industry. People, once you start flying private, you don't go back when you see all the benefits to it. And so all the industry reports just continue to show that this industry is on the rise. More people are using it, more first-time users. The user base is getting younger. Previous generations of users are growing and having bigger families, bigger businesses. So the industry forecast for the next, call it 5 years, looks very, very strong, as it has been. Right after COVID, it's certainly calmed down from the 3 years after COVID, but in the 2 years since the 3 years after COVID, now that we're 5 years behind it, I would call us in a normal market right now. Planes depreciate as they should. Buyers buy planes and they have some options. As we get later into the year here in this particular year, there's less good options, but it'll build back up. It basically spends the year building inventory up. And then in Q4, there's a lot of transactions. So, if you don't need a jet this quarter for a tax write-off, then you're not hurting yourself by waiting. In fact, you certainly get out of the competitors of the Q4. There were 2 waves of the supply chain. There was the immediate aftermath of COVID where just things were shut down. It was just hard to keep it going. And then there's the more recent, call it last 2-year supply chain, where it's maybe the smaller manufacturer of a subset of parts, or a part of the bigger airplane. And it might be, where are you down the line? Did your company scale with the ramp up in our industry, or did you go out of business, or did you? So, sort of a second wave of supply chain where there's certain companies and areas in our industry that haven't been able to keep up with the demand that just never ceases to amaze me. And the lead times, OEM lead times being 1 to 3 years out, depending on the category, the size of jet, that's healthy. For us, that is healthy. It's certainly the newer stuff, 10 years and younger, is certainly what's in right now. The older airplanes are not selling at the clip that they were post-COVID. Post-COVID, it was, forget 1 or 2% of a market for sale. There were still markets that had 1 or 2 airplanes for sale. It didn't matter where it was based. It didn't matter what it looked like, what the maintenance history on it was. It was just, get me the airplane, I don't care the cost. And now we're back to just, again, a more normal market.
So one thing I'm curious about, and this was not a planned question, but as we were talking about, obsolescence, avionics, planes being more than 10, 12, 15 years old, a huge conversation that we're having across all these different industries is AI and how that's impacting a variety of industries. When you think about like aircraft avionics and how quickly things become obsolete and how quickly the technology progresses, like what are you seeing at the conferences in your industry related to artificial intelligence and what impact, if any, it's having on the products out there?
Well, AI, obviously, it's everywhere, and we're coming back from a conference in Miami. It's called CJI, Corporate Jet Investors. It's a very well-attended one, very good one. They have global events, and they just had one. And you hear people talking about various different topics, and AI was one of them. I haven't heard AI into avionics yet, but I got to tell you, even without the artificial intelligence factor, meaning making decisions with data without human interference, the technology that these companies are bringing to the new models is just amazing, from safety perspective, mostly, but also comfort and reducing workload for crew members, right? The systems are doing so much for the pilots, even without the use of AI. It's impressive. And that's what causes the airplane developed 10, 15, 20 years ago that you could have bought last year, right? They're still in production, but they have technologies from the 90s, from the early 2000s. They're so different than an airplane developed in 2020, right? The last batch of certified airplanes. But you look at, for example, our industry here. We are all day, every day into markets, right? We need to know. That's what our clients are expecting from us. Should I buy a Challenger or a Falcon or an Embraer product? How does that going to be as an owner of these products for the next 5, 7, 10 years of the studies that we do for them. Yeah, there's a lot of data analytics that AI is helping a lot.
Yeah, the AI that I'm seeing, a couple of things. One, I was at a factory tour at an OEM recently, and they're starting to look at AI as in terms of, I wouldn't want to say flight following, that seems a little basic, but just understanding exactly what the common failure items are in their fleet, tracking the fleet to understand where the AOG, the aircraft on ground, the broken down airplanes are, and then using that data and all that data for years and years and years, and going beyond just following airplanes that break and tracking where they're at and where their support network is in terms of supporting the broken airplanes. But it's also about starting to get into the predictive analytics of, okay, you got about 10 more flights left before this widget's going to break. And so these OEMs are now, for very, very affordable services, because they want to learn and they want to know, and it helps them. And so they're starting to try to get ahead of, okay, well, get ahead of this issue before it goes bad, because when it goes bad, you lose the trip. So let's not wait for it to break. Instead of being reactive, let's be proactive and start thinking about preventative maintenance, and then until you lose a trip and then it's too late, right? So I'm starting to see it from the OEM aspect in terms of flight following and predictive maintenance. And then in our business at Guardian Jet, we already are the data-driven, analytical. If you're sports fans, we like to call ourselves the Moneyball of aviation, but we now have written some of our own AI that we're starting to get into and release here, and our customers have access to our proprietary online portal, the Vault. And inside of that, there are a lot of market analytics that can certainly call out some different patterns that maybe we weren't seeing before. So we've used it internally in terms of our data, valuing airplane, trying to predict where markets are going, seeing where the great value is, but then also on the OEM side externally and looking at their fleet. So those are the two areas that I've seen recently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think across industries, we're seeing people talk about how supply chains will become much more efficient as a result of some of the predictive analytics. And I wonder, on the one hand, it seems like that should bring the cost of ownership down over time, but I'm sure that's probably not the case.
Yeah, no, we should. And then also make the airplanes more available for flights. When you start to predict things, you're ahead of the curve. The big problem, the biggest problem, I think it's so big that it's unimaginable how big in dollars is the reputation, right? You buy these products, it could be anything. They're in the millions of dollars, and you start having different problems on your airplane, and you start missing trips. And you talk, it's mouth to mouth. You talk to other people, and that same operator with, the management company, maybe with 2 or 3 airplanes. Next time somebody says, I'm looking to an upgrade. I'm thinking I need a different model. Automatically, somebody's going to share that experience, as it is in any market or anything. And that brand will now have to work a lot harder to undo that feeling, that sentiment that they created in the market. And it translates into last sales on multi-million-dollar assets that they sell one by one. So making sure the trips aren't missed because of mechanical issues is an effort that takes a lot of resources from everybody.
Matt, you mentioned obviously it's November 2025. So we've also been in a government shutdown over the last few weeks, and a lot has been made of the FAA cuts and air traffic controller cuts, and that's obviously impacting commercial aviation. I'm supposed to be flying. I'm in Florida right now. I'm supposed to be flying to New York tonight. Thankfully, that flight is still on.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, where does private aviation rank among the flight priorities in a scenario like this?
Well, it depends on manufacturer, like the airport, the zones. Certain airports, for example, New York area, you have many airports between corporate airports and the commercial, the 3 commercial, Newark, JFK. I'm not even a pilot, let alone an expert in air traffic control, but certainly you feel that some airports are welcome, they welcome corporate aviation more than others. And you just have to know and take advantage of that. To try not to force into, trying to land with your little airplane at JFK when they're trying to manage airplanes coming from all over the world between cargo and passengers and military sometimes. When there's another airfield not far from there on Long Island that they're private aircraft only, right? And this is a very legit question because people don't know. Like you assume you know New York if you're from New York or from travel to New York a lot, but people come from all over the planet, coming from the Middle East, coming from Asia. You have to study a little bit just so you don't get into a situation where it feels like you're not welcome, right? It's just coming in a time where resources are tight.
And certainly you guys are not air traffic controllers. I guess I'm curious, just anecdotally, have you heard any complaint about anything they've been experiencing as a result of this, or is it mainly exclusive to commercial aviation?
I think it's mostly commercial. I think there's a little bit of an impact on private. Again, not being operators, I don't know, I'm not always the first one to hear about it, but I'm also the rare breed of whatever makes our skies safer, right? And I think some of these mandatory cuts were made for a reason because it started to become unsafe when you have or perceived as being underpaid and overworked, tired, and the staffing levels just weren't there. So if it makes our skies safer to cut 10,000 flights, and I had my first flight canceled yesterday morning. I was supposed to take actually an international flight to Canada, and then on the way home it was just a domestic flight just based on the routing I was doing. And they both got canceled. Thankfully enough, they got canceled before I left or had to wake up to go to the airport. So that was welcoming. I think it's going to sort itself out eventually. I do know that under the new administration, they have a lot of plans to upgrade the infrastructure and the software that we use in the skies. And I don't know how long that's going to take. It's certainly not an overnight thing, but even with the new deal to end the shutdown, I don't think it's going to get back to normal immediately. And, again, for us, makes our skies safer. And again, one of the reasons Gabe and I and Guardian Jet exist are because of some of the issues that the commercial airlines face. And then again, it's not a bad thing for our business.
Matt, you said something earlier that has me thinking. So, you mentioned sort of about 40% of your business is done in the fourth quarter. And I could say that, David and I certainly see that a lot of times when our clients come to us with talking about the purchase of a private jet, it usually is towards the end of the year. And taxes is a big consideration. But I'm curious, going through a proper due diligence can take some time. I mean, a proper inspection of an airplane can take, several months sometimes. So how do you bridge the gap between that, right? A shortage of time and then, getting a client comfortable enough, or yourself as well, to advise on the purchase under a limited time frame pressure?
Really good question. I'll give you my thoughts, and I'll let Gabe chime in as well. So in the perfect world, if you want to own an airplane in Q4, you're shopping by June. A well-run deal is a 3-month process from the time you locate an airplane, right? And some of that is paperwork with LOIs and sales agreements. But the rest of that, anywhere from 2 to say 8 weeks, is the inspection, right? Depending on how thorough it is, what you find, how long it takes to fix, what the repair schemes are. So when you start to, and we're still taking calls as of yesterday, and there will be more that people that want to buy airplanes by the end of the year. And we said, okay, well, we're going to work at our client's pace. We certainly, if you're not in a rush, we're not in a rush. You need to buy by the end of the year, we're going to buy by the end of the year. And I think I go back to that communication in terms of, okay, well, if we buy a 200-hour airplane that's 2 years old, we don't need to do a large inspection. We can get through that airplane, no problem. If you're still looking at a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 hour airplane that's maybe 3, 5, 10, 12 years old, a normal inspection time is 1 to 2 months in round numbers. And if you're going to short circuit that, there's risks that come along with that. And if you're going to sacrifice a thorough inspection, it's just about, first off, make sure you buy it right. Make sure you're getting an airplane with great pedigree that's been very well taken care of. And make sure you're getting an airplane that's had a significant inspection recently, even if it's not everything that you would do in a pre-purchase inspection, but maybe it was a large calendar or hourly inspection that was just done. And so you at least know the airplane was taken apart and looked at thoroughly. But it's about discussing those risks and those sacrifices up front. And if they still want to go, then let's go. We'll hop in and we'll get it done.
Awesome. And all great pieces of advice.
What do you see as the one thing that buyers of aircraft might often overlook or get wrong or not necessarily account for? I mean, you do these transactions day in, day out.
Yeah.
There must be some recurring patterns that you see where what are the pitfalls that, people can think about ahead of time?
David, I think by far with the, excluding the corporate flight departments where there's a bunch of, employees to look at technicalities and all that, they're very good at the due diligence and everything. From a high net worth individual perspective, in my opinion, at least, the biggest mistake I see, and I try to educate them as much as I can, and here goes the message once again, it's just confusing the sourcing of an airplane. Like, I found the airplane, and you receive a PDF or a PowerPoint and it looks great. Now it's just buy it. Like, that is in their mind, 90% of the job is the sourcing. When that's actually the opposite. That's 10% of it. Obviously, you want to find something that the visuals, the cosmetic aspects of it. But that's easy. It's not like, I'm not going to buy this house because the wall is gray and I don't like gray. Well, you repaint the wall. That's easy fix. None of these visual aspects are super complicated. So, and then overlooking the next steps of it with very professional approach is the most common mistake. People have no idea how the engines, for example, would be maintained and what's the inspection cycles. They're probably, or more than you think, about to get to a very heavy check that would take several months down and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have no idea, and they don't see it. They buy the airplane and it fly for 3-6 months. They're happy for that period of time, and then boom comes the factor that they didn't look. So don't let the visual aspects of your search or whoever is helping you and start overselling because it looks good to be more relevant than it should. It's actually a strategy that people they're trying to sell airplanes with problems. That's what they do. Make it look the best possible. And somebody is going to buy it because they fell in love with the colors or something like that. And then you get rid of the problem. It's a nice wrapping on a pumpkin that somebody could be handing over to you in exchange of a check that you try to avoid.
So that's good advice for just about everything in life, I guess, right? Is don't be swayed by the aesthetics.
Yeah. Understand what you're getting into before you get into it. I would say in addition to the cost, you have really understand your travel mission. You said it earlier. David joked that, you never really knew what does understanding your flight mission mean? Well, we say buy an airplane for 80 to 90% of your trip. If you're going New York to Florida, 90% of the time, you might have one European or Asian trip. You don't need to buy an airplane that's capable of going to Europe or Asia, unless you want to. Of course, listen, some people just say, I get it. It's not efficient. It's not perfect for the mission, but I just want it. But a lot of times we had a gentleman that we met the other day who had only flown private one time, and he wants to hop in and buy an airplane, and thankfully he's not in a rush. We have all next year to do it. But I told him, I left him with, let's set you up on some charters. We don't do that, but we introduce him to some operators that can charter airplanes for him, because you got to understand what you like, what you don't like. Do you like the galley in the front? Do you like the galley in the back? Do you like bulkheads? Do you like couches? Do you like conference areas? Do you like, big galleys, little galleys? Do you want a crew rest area for the extra long trip? So there's a lot of things and configurations and aircraft sizes, and make sure you're understanding their performance too, because a lot of things that people say jets can do on paper, and then when you actually fill them up with gas and with people, or there's some weather out there or some winds, maybe they can't perform as advertised or as expected. And so you really gotta dive in on your own mission and the capabilities of the jets as well, and the layouts.
That's good. That's good life advice generally, right? So the two things I heard were don't rush into major decisions and don't put too much stock into looks over substance.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
exactly.
I think that applies in many areas of life, including
I think they tell you everything you need to know in life were the 10 rules that you learned in kindergarten up on the easel, and I think that's fair. Well said, dude.
That's great. Carlos, did you have a question as well? I think I might have interrupted you earlier inadvertently.
I guess just kind of looking forward, next 5 to 10 years, obviously, Matt, you sort of made a reference to, you think private aviation market's going to continue to grow. So any other maybe notable changes that are, you see coming that are maybe quite different from today and maybe not? And then also just maybe on regional differences, the difference in the private aviation market from the U.S. to Europe to Asia to the Middle East, is anything that's notably different in each market?
Yeah, I can take the second one for the international background. At Guardian Jet, I oversee the sales team, and we're 17. We have 17 what we call sales directors, and they're regionally based with a defined territory for their clientele. And that's from a global perspective, right? We have a lot of people international. And yes, very different market and very different expectations as far as what a buyer or a seller would expect from the broker, from the agent. And there's a lot of lack of maturity in several markets. I mean, meaning the U.S. is a very mature market for aviation. People, first, they treat the airplanes more like assets or equipment of a pool of many other equipment and assets they manage or they own. Right. So there's some patterns that you compare the way a transaction is done and the people around the transaction that could be compared to yacht or to real estate, or to even M&A of companies. It's a familiar way of doing business, right? If you're going to spend $50 million on a purchase, there's typically an attorney, an agent, a family office, a tax advisor, the technical advisor. It's more or less the same. You go to places, for example, in Europe, we have an office there in London. We have people fully dedicated to that market. And London is a place, but obviously it's for the entire European market. Airplanes, corporate airplanes, they're seen as more luxury assets. Like if you're buying champagne or diamonds, right? It's all about the appealing of the comfort and the experience less than it is of an equipment, of a mechanical equipment, all this maintenance conversation that we're having here, not how it goes much there. If you, there's going to be a very relevant event in the Middle East next week that we're going to be attending in Dubai. And it's another very different particular market. And all these markets, they move the corporate aviation segments. They own the same airplanes. An American buyer can buy from a Middle Eastern owner and vice versa. The brands design their products to serve all these needs, right? They have different cabin styles and this and that, but it's the same equipment for everybody, right? So we have to understand that and navigate through these differences.
In terms of just where I think the next 5 years in our industry go, Carlos, I just think, again, there's been a lot of wealth creation recently, corporate profits, a lot of companies with a lot of cash. I think the biggest area of growth, I think, is in a larger cabin market. You see Fractional, the Fractional companies are doing very well. Kind of a new one entering the fray recently too. I think will do well. I think because a lot of these people, it used to be a lineage, right? You would charter X number of hours a year, then you move into Fractional, then you own a light jet, and then you move up to a mid-size and a super mid-size, you keep up it. Now people are being introduced into large cabin jets a lot earlier into their flying careers, if you will. And they start flying bigger cabin jets sooner in what, as they're introduced into aviation, private aviation. And so when they buy their own airplane, they tend to start and they hop right over the smaller stuff and they hop right into the deep end of the market, which we're personally well versed to handle. But so I see a lot of growth on that end of it. Of course, you're going to continue to see people try to play in the electric space. People try to reduce the cockpit work. I still think we're ways away from that stuff, but it's certainly happening now all around us. I think the planes just continue to get more sophisticated, making it easier for pilots to fly. And again, I just see lots and lots of wealth creation is just going to continue to bring new entrants and people already in the market upgrading. So I just see it. You're certainly on the next 5 years, barring some global catastrophe. I think we're in a very good spot right now.
Yeah, very well said on the wealth creation. I think we're witnessing one of the, better. It's your day-to-day and your clientele and the concerns. Probably the biggest wave of wealth creation on the planet, right, in modern history. And obviously that is also very impactful in corporate aviation. There is a very good perspective for this segment, but also there are a lot of emerging markets coming and they're not sophisticated in terms of learning how to do it. And there's going to be a lot of mistakes as well. And hopefully we can try and educate as much as we can to avoid those.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, Gabe, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone listening will as well. And really excited that you were able to join us and excited to continue working with you and your great colleagues at Guardian Jet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, guys.
And we hope we can continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.